Hello, I'm grateful to interview Bart Brashers, the 2020 Pulakis Award winner. He co-founded the American Nyckelharpa Association that has advanced the preservation of the nyckelharpa, a traditional instrument in Swedish folk music. For his profession, he works researching and consulting on air quality and pollution science. He earned his PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington in Seattle. He has run photochemical grid models that identify the primary causes of Puget Sound's regional ozone pollution problems. These models have helped local authorities address pollution. So we're very grateful to have you on. Please tell us about the history of the nyckelharpa and what it means to Swedish culture.
Thank you. It's a very big honor to be here and to receive this award. I thought I would start out with sort of a history of the nyckelharpa. I have 3 of the major 5 shapes of the nyckelharpa as it evolved through the centuries that I thought I would play a few tunes on. We'll start out though with a little bit of, oh, you have disabled screen sharing. I thought I would show a few slides.
Oh, I believe I can activate it. One moment. Is it enabled now?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
So on the island of Gotland, which is out in the middle of the Baltic Sea, on the outside of a door to the church at Skällinge, there's this sort of like a triptych, a comic strip almost, and it's the 12 seasons. So the one on the farthest left there you can see is animal husbandry. And then in the middle there you can kind of see people are threshing the wheat, and the rightmost one is people are paying their taxes. And near the end, there is a party. And here are 2 musicians playing the nyckelharpa. The one on the right, you can kind of see he broke off part of his arm there. But if we just zoom in on the one on the left there, it's pretty clearly that instrument behind me, the medieval nyckelharpa.
How fascinating.
We know that this church, this part of the church, was built in the 1350s. So that's pretty old, pretty long time ago. Throughout the 1500s and 1400s, it was really popular in Sweden to paint the ceilings of your church. So here's a couple of angels who are playing the nyckelharpa from the 1500s. There's also a book that was published in 1549 in Germany that had a picture of it. Among other things, it was like a world music survey. So it showed different instruments from different parts of the world. And among other things, it had this thing called the Schlüsselfädel, which looks a heck of a lot like the instrument that I'm about to pick up here. So there were 3 of these medieval nyckelharpas that were found. One in Norway, one in Finland, and this one was found, well, one like this, was found in the town of Mora in Sweden. So everyone calls this one the Mora harpa. And you can see the top and the bottom are parallel. It's flat like a guitar, unlike the other instruments and unlike violins, which are arched. And I thought I would play a tune that's from a town that's not terribly far away from Mora. It's called Soleren, the Isle of the Sun. It's out on an island there in the middle of a big lake. And this one is called the Långdans from Soleren.
beautiful,
One
beautiful.
row of frets and 2 drone strings. This is probably what it sounded like in the 1500s when traveling itinerant musicians wandered through your town and played you a tune.
Wow, that's amazing to have, such connection with the past. That's beautiful.
About the year 1600, British sailors brought back the idea of resonance strings from India. And of course, that got added to a number of instruments, the hardanger fiddle in Norway, for example, the viola d'amour in France, for example, and the nyckelharpa in Sweden. So I have 3 playing strings, a drone string in the middle, and 1 melody string on the one side, another melody string on the other side. So that this is called the contrabass or contra drone nyckelharpa. And then it has all these resonance strings that when you play a note, they keep ringing and you get these overtones. The other really cool thing about this particular instrument, it's fully chromatic all the way up until here where the frets get too close together and you can't squeeze them in. But it's totally fully chromatic. It has all the notes on a piano, and actually has a few notes that don't exist on the piano because there's a few notes that are in between the notes. So I could play in a major key, and I can play in a minor key, and I can play in something in between, something Swedish. If you analyze where these extra keys, these extra blue notes fall, they're the same notes that the guys who are playing slide guitar and saxophone and playing American blues, they're those same notes that are in between the major and the minor third and in between the major and the minor seventh.
How fascinating.
So the Swedes were playing blues way long ago. I'll play you a tune that uses them. It's after a guy named Byskalle who lived 1789 to 1847. So he would have been in his heyday just about 200 years ago right now. This one's called Branten, or either the steep or the cliff or some really steep bit.
So beautiful. It has such a mesmerizing sound and so like a cheerfulness. It's wonderful.
Both cheerful and very drony, right? Because that was
Yeah.
still a medieval ideal That was the way that music was supposed to sound back when you're in the late medieval period.
How
And
wonderful.
finally, in the 1830s, the idea of counterpoint harmony came to Sweden. So Bach's ideas of counterpoint harmony finally made it there at about that time. And in response to these changing musical fashions, there was another kind of nyckelharpa. Instead of two rows or two on the same string, they started to have, they put the second melody string next to the first melody string, so you could actually play counterpoint. It was still very drony, but you could still play chords, basically. Now, I don't have one of those. I have one on order. And, but I'm going to try to mimic what it would sound like in the late 1800s. So instead of these melodic 16th notes where there's lots of melody going on, in the mid to late 1800s, it turned out that people just wanted rhythm. There was more complex rhythms and really kind of stupid, simple melodies there. So it's like basically triads. So that's what it might have sounded like in the second half of the 1800s. In 1925, there was a guy who got frustrated by the lack of range of the nyckelharpa. It only went down to a C, which is not as low as you can go and get notes on a fiddle. And he was playing with a bunch of fiddle players. He had a job playing with fiddle players. So over the winter, 25 to 26, he built a 3-row nyckelharpa. And that's the sort of the dominant form of the nyckelharpa today, still. There are, in the 1970s, people came up with the 4-row nyckelharpa, but it hasn't caught on nearly as much. I would still say between 5 and 10% of the nyckelharpa players play a 4-row. Almost everybody plays this 3-row.
Interesting.
So I thought I'd play you another tune that was really shows off how you can play counterpoint harmony. You can pick your chords to play with you, and you play those kind of interspersed along with your melody. This is a schottisch, which was introduced to Europe by the French in the 1840s. This was composed by this band right here in the 1990s. So even though it's very modern, they're still connecting with their past in a continuous way and playing and dancing the schottisch and other dances, of course.
I love that. I love that, and that understanding of, you know, building on the tradition, and that's just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. I know, your father introduced you to this instrument. Can you speak to how he introduced you to this musical tradition?
Yes, we lived in Sweden when I was in fifth grade, 1975 to 76, and he built the first nyckelharpa that I ever played on in an adult education course. And we brought it back to the United States that fall, and I started playing with the local orchestra.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I know in addition to your musical instrument, as I said, you are a scientist, and I'm interested about the connection. It has been observed that talented musicians often have a strong mathematical and scientific mind. For example, Einstein also was a musician playing the violin. In one of his late journals, he wrote, quote, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I get most joy in life out of music," end quote. I am curious, how has your interest in Swedish music and culture influenced how you think about your scientific work?
Well, it actually greatly influenced where I got my PhD because I had gotten into graduate school in a couple of different places, and I decided to go to UW because of the strong Scandinavian folk music and dance scene in Seattle.
Oh, how
So that has an indirect effect on there. Um, Later on in my career, right now I work for a company called Ramboll, which was founded in the late 1940s, just after World War II, by two Danish professors. They looked around and saw that Europe was going to need a lot of rebuilding and said, we should do this in the most sustainable way possible. So they were already thinking in terms of sustainability back in the 1940s, which was pretty early on. And some of their organization charts they use, uh, it's like they have the Environment and Health Division, which is the one that I work for, as the hub, and all the spokes are the transportation and the energy and the bridges and the all the other things that an engineering company does. That uh, environment and health is supposed to flavor how we do everything else in the most sustainable and ecologically sound way possible.
Yeah, and I know in Scandinavian cultures there's this strong sense of environmental concerns and sustainability. One thinks of the Swedish environmentalist Greta Thunberg, who's been in the news very recently. Um, I'm wondering, what is it in Swedish culture that brings up this attention to the environment? Why does Swedish culture hold this out so important?
That's a really good question. I was thinking about this, and if Sweden is about the size of California and Oregon put together, with about a third of the population of the Los Angeles basin. So people are really spread out. The biggest town is Stockholm, and it's with you count suburbs and so on. It's a good bit over 1 million. But then it gets really rapidly down to small towns. For example, the town that I lived in, Arboga, uh, it's about 12,000 people in the community, and it's the 52nd largest city in the country. So 12,000 is like the 50th largest. So everybody lives widespread, very close to the rural areas. Like when I was living there, I could go walk across the bridge, across the river, and take a walk in the forest. And when I was living there and going to school, they would take the whole class out into the forest, and we would learn about biology and physics and all sorts of stuff. Well, they didn't call it physics in elementary school, but you learn about the world by experiencing it in the forest. So I think in Swedish culture, there's a very strong connection to nature. People all have, or many people have second homes, summer cottages that are usually out of the city and out into the nature. So they spend several weeks every summer communing with nature. So I think that has instilled a real concern for nature, which then leads to this idea of keeping Man ska hålla I. You have to hold the nature. You have to keep it going, and you have to work for it.
Yes, and that's important for us to reflect, because now that we're very urban, so many people aren't in connection with nature in the United States. The more and more urban environments, we've lost that connection, and it's very important to sort of rediscover that, and find our roots in how we all used to be connected with nature. And I know, we're speaking July 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, and with a lot of the things that were happening when everyone sort of went into shelter. There was less activity, and some of the environmental patterns of pollution changed. And I know worldwide, for the first time, people were seeing things about nature that they hadn't seen for years. And I'm curious, with your work with the air pollution as a scientist, can you tell us, as an air pollution scientist, what has been happening to the atmosphere and what we are learning during this unusual time of the pandemic?
Yeah, this is a great experiment. It's really hard to do with otherwise. We kind of had a similar, smaller version after 9/11, but this is a much longer period. So the factories are pretty much operating the same, and power plants are still operating the same. What's changed is that people are not driving back and forth to work, and they're not driving places to go have fun. So the use of personal cars has drastically decreased. Trucks are still pretty much out there because they're still delivering products, so those are about the same, but personal cars are really the thing. In my work of identifying problems with the sources of the ozone in Puget Sound, car traffic in Pierce, King, and Snohomish County accounted for the vast majority of the chemicals that caused ozone over there in Enumclaw. It wasn't the factories, it wasn't the power plants, or the refineries, or anything like that. There are places in India that we see a lot of news reports of people being able to see mountains in the distance that are 50 miles away that they hadn't been able to see for such a long time, multiple generations even, because of all that haze that the ozone pollution causes from motor vehicles. So it's a great experiment.
Very fascinating, very interesting. As I mentioned, you co-founded the American Nyckelharpa Association, an organization that promotes and preserves the Swedish musical tradition worldwide. For 40 years, the Ethnic Heritage Council has worked to support and strengthen ethnic organizations in their mission to promote and preserve cultural heritage, believing that these organizations have an important mission. In your opinion, why are ethnic organizations important?
In the great melting pot that is America, and even in the somewhat melting pot that's Sweden, for example, smaller countries, if you don't work at it, it's going to fall away. You have to actually work to maintain traditions. You can't just assume that the people who are doing the traditions will maintain their own traditions that are, different from the average. A lot of people, when they move to America, they just want to fit in. They want to be the same old thing. Like all the Swedes who come to work for Microsoft, they start acting really American pretty quickly. You have to work at it to maintain your culture. And organizations like the Ethnic Heritage Council, or the Scandia Folk Dance Society, or the American Nyckelharpa Association, or in Sweden, the state government, running, say, adult education classes on how to build the nyckelharpa, even back in the 1970s. Much less they run classes on how to do traditional handiwork and folk dancing and all sorts of things like that are part of the folk culture. You have to work at it, or it'll just dissipate.
So true. Thank you. Thank you. Last question, and we ask every interviewee, why is your ethnic heritage important to you and your community?
My ethnic heritage is so intertwined with me and my life. I have, for lack of a better word, artifacts in my house that are, handiwork, woodworking things that my great-great-grandfather built. And I have some tea towels that my great-great-great-grandmother grew the flax and spun the linen and wove these towels. And they're here. They're part of my fabric of my life. So the ethnic part of my life is just, it's here. And that is one of the reasons that I have worked so hard over the decades to promote the nyckelharpa and Swedish folk music and folk dancing in general, and tried to really give back to the people who maintained that before me and brought it to me.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the good work you do preserving this heritage. And congratulations again on the winning the Pulakis Award for 2020. All the good work you do is so important for now and for future generations, and so we thank you, and we're very honored to interview you today. Thank you very much.
Tack så mycket. Thank you. It's a very big honor.